Server actions are simple functions that run on the server, and they are proper for form submitting or data mutation. They are not limited to form submission. You can invoke them from everywhere, for example, on the server itself or on the browser, like by clicking on the button or calling them in the use effect, and etc. But the good thing about them is that since they are going to be run on the server, you can have access to dynamic functions such as cookies or headers. And the way it works, if you call them from the browser or from the client side, Next.js first creates an endpoint, and then after invoking them, Next.js will call them via post method behind the scene. And they really make the life easier. Instead of calling an API endpoint from the clients, you can easily import that function and then simply call them in your client-side component. Here, for example, I have created a page called Movies, and I'm showing some movies, some titles, and the page itself. As you can see, I have hard-coded some movies. I don't want to bother myself with creating database and connecting to them. But imagine I have these movies and I'm rendering them somewhere on the page within this list. And now I want to implement a like button functionality. So to do so, I create a component called like, and I have to create it somewhere. It's better to be inside the component folder. Let me create one, a like.tsx or like button. And then I have to export something. Now I can import it here, like button. Then I can see the like button now appears here, but I want to send the ID of the like button so that when I click on this, it will send some information about the movie that I just liked to the server, because we assume that we want to update the database of our movies and increase the number of likes. So I pass this ID to the like button, ID equal movie.id, but it's not accepting ID. I have to define it here. It should accept an ID, and the type of ID would be maybe a number. Now that I have ID, so we used to call API endpoints or define some routes here, but thanks to server actions, there's no need to do so in these cases, because the nature of our work here is data mutation. It's not fetching some data from the server. I could have defined some endpoints and call them here, maybe by calling the fetch function inside the button, on click like this, on click equal fetch, then like, something like this. But we don't want to implement like this, because to implement like this, we have to define this route somewhere, but we don't want this, because there's a simpler solution, or maybe cleaner solution. I can implement it now and you can see and compare it. So let me get rid of this. I simply create a function somewhere. I can define it here, even function like, but I don't want to put all the logics at some point. I rather to have a folder called server actions. Maybe it's totally fine. You can choose other names. I create a file and I call it like movie.ts. Then here I define a function, export function like movie. It accepts an ID, maybe of type number. And then from here, if I have any database, I can call it. Maybe I have a database somewhere, then I can send this ID and like it. And I assume that my database has this function that will do the like functionality for me. But for now, I just want to put a console here instead of that. But the important thing here is that we must decorate this file as a server-side file by using by writing use server. So when we add this directive at the top of the file, it means that it should never be transferred to the clients, and Next.js will take care of it. But if I call it from my client, as I said, it's going to be called via an HTTP request from the client. And now, since this button is going to be run from the client, it's going to call this like function or like movie function via that HTTP request. Let's try it. First of all, I have to add this use client directive here as well, because this is my like button and I'm using this event, which is on click. And this kind of functionalities are only available on the client-side components. Now we are good. What I have to do here, I simply import this like function, like button, like movie function, and I pass this like. And as you can see, I'm importing it from the server action, which is a function, and I'm simply calling it. And it's complaining about something because I have to define all the server action functionalities as async functions. So export async function like movie, then now you're good. I can put await event here if I want to have the result maybe of my invocation. But since it's not returning something, I'm fine. I can get rid of this too. But later, if you want to see the result, if it was successful or not, you should go with this pattern. Maybe you can put them here and check the result if there's any anomaly or something inside the result. Let's try it. If I open the console here, let me make it smaller. Now I try to click, and as you can see, since this console is running on the server, you see all the logs that will be run on the server. So if I click on the movie 2, you can see movie 2 now is clicked or liked, and so on and so forth. But if I open the browser's console, I'm not expecting any client-side console like there, but maybe server-side consoles. So let's take a look. You can see there's no console log from the server here, but this undefined is something that I put here. If I get rid of it, you don't see them anymore. So if I click again, it's going to be run only on the server, but not on the browser. But on the network tab, if we take a look, you can see some posts have been done to the server. It means Next.js is posting data as soon as I click on the buttons. Let's debug and inspect one of these. You can see the endpoint is pointing to the page itself, to the route, and I'm on this route /movies. But when I open it, I send a GET request, but when I click on something, I call a server action, it will post to the same endpoint, because behind the scene, it has created this endpoint for me because of the server action existence on my page. So it's posting some data to this endpoint, and it's done behind the scene automatically. I haven't done anything. And let's take a look inside the payload, and you see there's a number, like the first argument is 1. I assume this one is the movie number or movie ID. If I go to another one, you can see 2 here, 3, again 1, and so on and so forth. So we can clearly see the difference between calling the server actions by importing them and calling them like a simple functions here, and compare them with fetch API that we could also have. Instead of calling a function, we can call an endpoint. If your endpoint exists on other domains, of course, you have to go with this solution. Or if you want to define this route on your page, that's also okay. But the simpler solution, instead of calling the fetch function, is to just import it. You can also use these server actions as the action attribute of your forms. So when you submit a form, it will call your function, your server action behind the scene for you. As an example, I have prepared something. Let me go to the home page. And on the home page, you can see I've created this simple UI here, a comment box, for example. It has this text area and then an input, and then a submit button. And a form has wrapped these 2 items here. Whenever I submit, I press the submit, it will submit the form for me. The same situation, I can handle the form submission and get the data from the form and then send them to an API. But thanks to server actions, we can pass the server action function directly to the form, and the rest will be taken care by Next.js. Let's try it. If I go to the components, you can see this comment box, and it has this form, then it has this text area and the input and the button of type submit. Now I want to add an attribute called action, and this action should point to a function. We call it add comment. And I have already created this add comment inside the server actions folder. Let's take a look inside. You can see the simple pattern, use server, then this add comment function, which is an async function. And since this function is going to be called by a form, I can expect some data to be sent of time form data. And this form data is going to have some methods like get, and I can get all the data that has been sent to this function via this get and passing the field name, and use them and collect them at some point or inside a constant. I've called it here comments. So if we go back to the form again, you can see that these form fields have some names like this: name equal comment, or this one input name equal user. The same names I can receive on my server action. So what I've done here inside the action, I'm getting the form data of type form data, of course, and I can get all the form fields by calling get, then the form input name. Now, at this point, if I console log the comment object, let's see what is inside it. I put something, hello from user, like this, and then I submit. But before that, let me open the terminal. I clean it, I submit. Now, as you can see, I have an object, a clean object that has this message that user just sent to me. And let's take a look inside the network tab. You can see this is something that I just sent of type post, of course. If I open it inside the payloads, you can see that it's now sending them in the form data. It's sending data like this and some other data or information. They are for security. Maybe I cover them later. And now from now on, when we receive this form data, we can do whatever we want. For example, here I've written a small script that stores this information somewhere, and if we refresh, we can see the new comments somewhere. Let's try it again. Hello world from Mohi. I submit, and if I refresh, I can see a new comment here added by me. We can of course do some kind of data validation at this level. That's totally fine. For example, since I have Zot installed, I can import it. Import z from Zot. I think like this, and then I can define a schema. This schema will accept a comment and user ID, or user actually, and I can define it const comment schema equals Zot.schema, and I think I have to import it directly instead of this. And I'm doing it wrong. Actually, I have to call object. I define an object and it returns a schema. Then using this schema, I can call something called parse or save parse if you don't want to receive an error. Then I pass this comment. Then this save parse will return an object, the result of parsing. I call it validated fields. And then inside this, let's see, we have this success. And in terms of success, then we can do the submission. Otherwise, we can just reject or send some errors to users. Let's try. Else I can send maybe an error, invalid comment. Now let's see. And it's complaining because, let me see, the type of these actions, whatever we are passing to this action attribute, should be of type one of these. For example, I can send a string, or if I'm passing a function, it should return a promise of void, but I'm returning something else here. So it's not valid a statement. I cannot do it like this, but instead I can reject, for example, using promise.reject like this, then I can return a message. Now it's fine. It's not complaining anymore. But for handling data errors like this, we can do something else. Later I will cover in this video. For now, let's try it. If I just put and send one of these and leave the other empty, let's see what happens. If I refresh, still submitting. Let me see what's wrong, because it sends them as an empty string. If I take a look inside the network again, let me submit one more time. I submit, but it sends the user as empty string, which is valid. We can define something to like having minimum 1. And if I try again, 1, 2, 3, now I'm expecting an error or rejection. Yeah, we can see the rejection here. It means it hasn't been done or added to our database. But as you can see, we couldn't see any feedback on the form, indicating that the form was submitted successfully or unsuccessfully. And to get the response response of calling server action when we are submitting via form, we have a hook from React called useActionState. We can call it, and we have to pass this action to that hook, and then it will give us the feedback or the the status of that action. Maybe it is still running, it will give us a pending attribute. If it's failed, it will give us the errors. Let's try it. So I call this useActionState, and it accepts server action. I pass the add comment here, and it has the signature. You have to change a little because first parameter should be the previous state, and we are not using it here anyhow. And the second parameter now is the form data itself. And in here, instead of rejecting, I can simply pass or return whatever I want. For example, here I can say there's an error, and otherwise I can return something else, return an empty object that doesn't have error. Now if I go back here, when I call this, it's complaining in the action because the add comment cannot satisfy the required type that this form action needs because of we have changed, of course. But this useActionState actually returns something. We call it action. Actually, it returns an array. So the first parameter would be the state. Second would be form action. I can call it whatever I want. That's okay. And then another one called pending. So I can now use this form action here, and everything should be fine. Let's try it. If I go home to the home page, you can see I try to leave something alone, and then hello, for example, and I don't pass the second parameter. After submitting, I'm expecting this state to be fulfilled from the server because of returning this here. This value is going to be passed as the state to this item on my form. So if I try to render it somewhere, maybe here, I can check if the state has error, then show it. Let's try now. Hope for the best. Invalid comment, as you can see. Now I could handle the form feedback whenever the server actions are returning an error. I can now show them here. And also there are other fields, we can grab them here as well. State.fields, for example, here. But this is how you can make advantage of this useActionState from React. It also has this pending, and it's good to use it as a loading indicator maybe somewhere. Maybe I can use it here, disabled equal pending. And if the server action is running, is slow, we can show that disabled status. So I can make it slower by simply putting this await for a second or 3 seconds to see it. Let's try it again. I simply pass 1 and 2 here, and then it's disabled. I cannot click, but the UI is not perfect. Let me fix the UI. Now if the button of type submit is disabled, if it is disabled, then maybe background color should become, I don't know, this color, and color itself can be something else. And cursor can be forbidden. I guess we have it. No, not allowed. Yeah, this one. Let's try it again. I go with this 1, 2. Now it is, as you can see, it becomes disabled while I'm submitting the form. So as you can see, it has some other benefits. useActionState. You can get the state of the result of the action, and then it returns this form action. You can pass it to the form itself as the action, and pending that shows the status of the form. So there might be cases that you want to pass some extra information that doesn't exist in this form, in these inputs, but you see you want to send them somehow. One simple solution is to have some kind of hidden inputs, but the other convention, which is totally JavaScript, pure JavaScript, is to bind and create another function by calling the bind and binding some value to that function. So let me explain how. Imagine this server action receives maybe user ID of type number, then form data itself, and then with this user ID I'm going to do some stuff. But for now I will just log it here, and instead of using this useActionState, I want to get rid of it. I want to pass it directly, but before that I have to make another function by calling the bind. So if I call the bind from this server action, I can bind this, and the second parameter I can pass different inputs, For example, I want to populate user ID here. User ID can be something that I can receive, for example, from my properties, like here. User ID is going to be something of type number. Now I can pass user ID, and this bind will return another function. I can get it, const add comment with user ID, for example. I'm defining another one, so I can pass now this function to the actions. And it's complaining because of the output of this function. Let me get rid of these returns here. For now, I can just return nothing to make it work. And you see, I'm not using that hook anymore. I don't have these. Now, if in the place that I'm rendering this comments box, this component, I have to pass user ID as well. I can pass a random ID 1, 2, 3. Now, if I try to submit, I'm expecting on the server, by submitting this form, this user ID also being passed alongside the form data itself. Let's see if I 1, 2, 3 again, like this, and then I can open the terminal. Yeah, I'm receiving the ID. So the UI is like, I'm not clicking, but actually I'm clicking, and you can see the I'm receiving the ID here in the server action. So this is a pattern also. By calling this bind, you can, on the server action, you can make and bind some values to the function and make new functions and pass it to the server action itself, to the action of the form itself. Also, there's another function, or there's another hook, React hook, called useFormStatus. And the way it works, you can call it on a component level when it is wrapped with a form. So somewhere here, for example, I can have a component, a client-side component. I think I have written something. Submit a status, for example. I will render it here. Submit status. And here inside this submit status, I can call this hook useFormStatus from React DOM, and then it returns some information. For example, the action, which is the function or the path of that function that we are calling, data that we are passing to that server action, which is form data, as you can see here. Method can be, in this case, it is post, and pending. For example, pending, I can maybe use it and show something. If it is pending, I'm going to say submitting, otherwise I'm going to render submitted here. So I don't need this, like this. Let's try it. If I go back and in my server action, I have this 3 seconds delay. Let me refresh. Now if I, it's saying submitted, but because pending is false, rendering this. So let's try hello with double L. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, and you see this is submitting. This can be helpful by calling this hook to get some information about the form and stuff. If you need them based on your logic, you can go for it. Let's see. For example, here I can say get name, or I don't know the name. Yeah, username maybe. Username. Yeah, user, and then maybe I can put it here like this. So if I try to submit, you see submitting. You can access the form data via this data variable that will be returned by useFormStatus. You can also do redirection on the server action when you are passing it to the form. So by default, when you pass the server action to the action itself, it's not going to be redirect or reload the page. But in the server action, you can also redirect users to other places. So in the add comment at the end, I can redirect users, redirect to somewhere, for example, to about page. I don't know if I have it. I know that I do have contact us page. Maybe I want to redirect them here, and this should be imported from navigation, I guess. Yep. Now let's try again. Hello, 1, 2, 3, and submit. And now, as you can see, after submission, a redirection that just happened because of this code and because of the fact that I'm passing the server action and passing it as the action attribute for our form. And as the last part, I'm going to talk about security a little, because imagine we have these server actions that are simple functions, but you can see use servers. And at the beginning, I mentioned when you have these kind of functions and you import them in your page or in your client-side components, they're going to become an endpoint for you. So Next.js will create endpoints. So does it mean if I have any kind of functions like, I don't know, function delete, it will be publicly available to everyone? And the answer is no, because it will become an endpoint if and only if you import them in your client-side components. So in this case, since this function is not used inside the client side, in the client side, it's not going to become a public API endpoint, so you can post information into it. And the second security checkpoint that Next.js has done is that whenever you open the page, here, for example, I refresh, you can see something, a hidden form element has been added to your form. Let me open it, and this is a one, like a zoom. You can see its type is hidden, and it has this name action ID with a random number or random string in front of it. And the way it works, Next.js will create this and generate this on build. So if you rebuild the project, or if after a certain amount of time, I think it would be 14 days, it will be regenerated. So other people, maybe other users from outside world, cannot easily call your endpoint without having this. So if you get rid of this and you don't have this input hidden, you cannot submit. And if you try to submit your form, first Next.js will take a look if you have this action ID, and will compare it with the one that it has on the server. And if they are matching, then it allows that form to be submitted. Otherwise, it assumes that someone, maybe, I don't know, a hacker is trying to submit something to you and call your server action, and it prevents it. And it is a nice security check that they have added. So if I try to submit, you can see that this information would be submitted as well. So if I go to here, because of having this input hidden, of course, it's going to be sent to the server. And you don't need to do anything about it, because Next.js will take care. And it's just something that is good to know. I think that was it from server actions in a nutshell. If we want to recap, server actions are simple functions. You can put them inside files in your server, and you can decorate them with this directive useServer. And these functions can be imported in the client-side component and can be directly called. And its benefit is their simplicity, because you can import, and it's easier to import a function and call it in your client side instead of making an NPI and calling it inside your components and calling it with maybe fetch function. They are easier, and they are TypeScript friendly. You can pass the information that they need, as well as the fact that you can use this server action to create actions for your form and form submissions. See you in the next ones.